Taphophobia is defined as an abnormal fear of being buried alive as a result of being mistakenly pronounced dead. This fear has been around for centuries, with famous authors such as Pliny the Elder and Edgar Allan Poe writing about the topic. In the 1700s, the safety coffin was invented, which used a variety of devices to allow people thought deceased to communicate with those above the ground. The most notable design includes some type of bell that someone buried prematurely could ring if they woke up in their coffin. In modern day, there is still quite a fear of being buried alive, even with numerous advances in medicine. In today's episode, we will examine a frightening kidnapping case that occurred in 1968, where a woman was buried alive for 83 hours. This case is known as the Barbara Mackle kidnapping. In December 1968, Barbara Mackle, a 20-year-old student at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, contracted the Hong Kong flu, which was ultimately responsible for killing several million people worldwide. Due to the seriousness of the scenario, Barbara's mother, Jane, drove up from Florida to pick up her daughter and bring her back home. Barbara came from a wealthy family, with her father being an extremely successful real estate developer. On the night of December 17th, Barbara and Jane checked into the Roadway Inn Motel in Decatur, Georgia. They would spend the night and then drive back in the morning to Florida. In the middle of the night, around 4 a.m., the two women heard a knock on the door. Jane got up and looked through the peephole and saw two officers. One of the officers told Jane that Barbara's boyfriend, Stuart Hunt Woodward, had been in a serious automobile wreck. Jane quickly swung open the door and immediately realized that the two people were not cops and had just been impersonating them. It was a man and a woman. The woman was pretending to be a male cop. The two stormed the room, chloroformed Jane, and tied her up. They grabbed Barbara and forced her down to the car. As she walked, Barbara was instructed to keep absolutely quiet. The two individuals that had kidnapped Barbara were Gary Stephen Christ, then age 23, and Honduran Ruth Eisman Shire, then age 26. These individuals had stalked Barbara for months. They handpicked Barbara due to her family wealth and also her toughness. Once all three were in the car, the kidnappers drove around 20 miles away to a pine forest. There, they walked Barbara back in the woods to where a pre-dug grave existed. There was an open coffin down below, and Kirst and Eisman Shire forced Barbara to climb down in it. The box down below was no ordinary coffin, though. The box had been modified so that a person could stay alive for a period of time. The coffin had an air pump, food, a lamp, and water that was heavily dosed with sedatives. Once Barbara finally lied down, the kidnappers forced her to hold a kidnap sign and took a photo. Then the burying began. Barbara screamed as the dirt hit the box. She continued to hear the sound of the dirt hit the box, and it soon became fainter and fainter before she couldn't hear anything at all. Robert Mackle, Barbara's father, would soon be contacted by Kirst and Eisman Shire in a note. They wanted $500,000 in exchange for Barbara's life. Working with the FBI, Mackle had to meet the kidnappers' demands, which were the ransom should be put in a suitcase and that only Robert should drop it in the woods. Also, he had to put a classified ad in the Miami Herald that said, "Loved one, please come home. We will pay all expenses and meet you anywhere at any time. Your family." Mackle dropped off the money and Kirst kept his word, notifying the FBI of the approximate location of Barbara. On the morning of December 20th, FBI agents spread across the forest, found the burial site, and frantically dug up the box with their hands. Barbara was alive and in good shape considering the circumstances. After the initial shock and fear of being buried alive, Barbara had managed to transition to a calmer state under the ground. She was buried for 83 hours, more than 3 days. In her book, 83 Hours Until Dawn, Barbara noted how she thought of spending Christmas with her family and never doubted she would be rescued. Meanwhile, Kirst and Eisman Shear split up and fled. At this point, the FBI didn't have the identities of the kidnappers. However, that would quickly change. The FBI were able to track down the Volvo Kirst had abandoned, and paperwork in the car revealed both kidnappers' identities. Within a day, a tip led to finding Kirst in the Florida swamps. Kirst was sentenced to life in prison, but got out on parole after just 10 years. Several months after Kirst was arrested, in March 1969, Eisman Shire, who was the first female on the FBI's most wanted list, was arrested in Oklahoma. She had applied for a hospital job, and her fingerprints from her background check were discovered by authorities. Eisman Shire was sentenced to 7 years. She served 4, and then was deported back to Honduras. Perhaps the most shocking aspect of this story is what happened to Kirst after prison. Kirst went on to medical school in Mexico, eventually becoming a doctor. He applied to practice in Alabama and was rejected, but he did get accepted to practice medicine in Indiana and did so for years. In 2003, his medical license was revoked, and soon he would turn back to his old habits. This time, though, Kirst would begin drug smuggling and would eventually get arrested in 2006 and serve 5 years. This case is truly a strange one, with many questions surrounding why they had to bury Barbara and they couldn't have just tied her up. Also, the kidnappers seem to get off pretty easily for what many consider to be an extremely cruel act. This is truly one case that could have been much more worse for everyone.